Have you ever looked at your life and thought, you know what, I should just buy some land and start farming? Grow real food, raise some animals, get away from all this modern nonsense, and actually do something meaningful with your hands? It's a nice dream. A lot of people have it. The peaceful morning routine, the fresh air, knowing exactly what's in your food because you grew it yourself. Maybe you sell some stuff at a farmer's market on weekends, make a little extra money, live simply. Sounds perfect. Here's the problem though. Starting a farm costs an absolutely insane amount of money, and most people who try it have no clue what they're getting into financially until it's way too late. I help people understand money and avoid expensive mistakes that keep them broke for years. If you want to actually know what farming costs before you commit to something you can't afford, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Let's start with the most obvious thing everyone underestimates. Let's start with land, because that's the first thing you need, and it's not cheap anymore. It just isn't. Remember when you could find affordable rural land if you were willing to drive an hour outside the city? Those days are gone. Completely gone. Arable farmland, the kind you can actually grow things on, runs anywhere from $3,000 to $10,000 per acre, depending on where you are in the country. And we're not talking about buying a quarter acre for a backyard garden. If you want to actually farm, like grow enough food to matter or raise livestock, you're looking at a minimum of 5 to 10 acres. That's the baseline for a small operation that's more than just a hobby. Do the math. 5 acres at $5,000 per acre is $25,000. 10 acres? You're at $50,000 to $100,000 just for the land. And that's before you've planted a single seed or bought a single chicken, before you've done anything except own some dirt. But it gets worse when you think about what land actually needs before you can use it. Most raw land doesn't come ready to farm. You need water access, which means either you're paying for well drilling at $15 to $30 per foot, and wells can easily go 100 to 300 feet deep depending on your water table. That's $1,500 to $9,000 right there, just to have water. Then there's soil testing to see if your land can even grow what you want. Clearing if there's brush or trees. Grading if the drainage is bad. Access roads or driveways so you can actually get equipment to your fields. None of this is included in the land price. It's all extra. And people think they'll just find some cheap rural plot and make it work. They see listings for $2,000 an acre and get excited. But that land is cheap for a reason. It's either got terrible soil, no water access, bad drainage, or it's so remote you'll spend a fortune just getting utilities out there. The land that's actually good for farming, people know what it's worth. They're not giving it away. So you're already looking at $30,000 to $100,000 minimum just to own the dirt. That's before you've built anything, bought any equipment, or done any actual farming. Most people starting out don't have that kind of cash sitting around, so they finance it, which means you're paying interest on land that's not producing any income yet. You're already in the hole before day one. And that's just the land. You haven't even started dealing with what you need to put on it, because raw land by itself doesn't do much for you. You need infrastructure, and this is where costs start piling up fast in ways people don't expect. First, fencing. If you're raising any kind of livestock, even just chickens, you need fencing to keep them in and predators out. Basic agricultural fencing runs $3 to $8 per linear foot, depending on the type. Let's say you've got 5 acres. That's roughly 1,900 linear feet of perimeter. At $5 per foot, you're looking at $9,500 just for fencing. And that's if you install it yourself, which is backbreaking work. Pay someone to do it? Add another $3,000 to $5,000 in labor. Then there's water infrastructure. You already paid for the well, but now you need a way to get that water where it needs to go. Irrigation systems, storage tanks, troughs for animals, all of that costs money. A basic drip irrigation setup for a few acres can run $2,000 to $5,000. Livestock water tanks, frost-free hydrants in cold climates, backup storage, it all adds up fast. You need somewhere to store equipment and supplies. A basic barn or storage shed, nothing fancy, starts around $10,000 if you're building it yourself with a kit. Hiring contractors, $20,000 to $30,000 easy. And you need this stuff. You can't leave a tractor sitting out in the weather. You need somewhere to store feed so it doesn't get ruined by rain or eaten by rodents. Tools, seed, fertilizer, all of it needs covered storage. If your property doesn't have power, run to where you need it. That's another expense. Running electrical lines to outbuildings can cost $5,000 to $15,000, depending on distance. Solar setups for remote areas? Even more expensive up front. Don't forget about the driveway and access roads on your property. If you're going to be driving a tractor or truck around, you need proper paths. Gravel, grading, drainage, it's not free. Figure another $2,000 to $5,000, depending on how much area you need to cover. Add it all up and you're easily looking at another $30,000 to $50,000 in infrastructure costs. That's on top of the land purchase. You're now $60,000 to $150,000 in before you've bought a single piece of farming equipment or started growing anything. And people think farming is this cheap, simple lifestyle. It's not even close. Okay, so you've got land and basic infrastructure. Now you actually need equipment to farm. And this is where it gets really expensive. This one drives me crazy because the math is so obvious, and yet people convince themselves they can make it work somehow. You need a tractor. There's no way around it unless you're planning to dig everything by hand, which you're not going to do for more than a week before your back gives out. A new compact tractor, and I'm talking about the small ones suitable for a small farm, starts at $15,000 and goes up to $40,000 depending on horsepower and features. And that's just the tractor itself. It doesn't actually do anything without implements. The implements cost separately, every single one. You need a plow to turn the soil. That's $1,500 to $3,000. A harrow to break up clumps and prepare the seedbed. Another $1,000 to $2,500. A seeder or planter, $2,000 to $5,000. A mower for hay or pasture maintenance, $1,500 to $4,000. A box blade for grading, $500 to $1,500. Maybe a post hole digger. A spreader for fertilizer. A trailer to haul stuff. Each one costs money. You're looking at $30,000 to $60,000 just for basic equipment setup, minimum. And people think, okay, I'll just buy used equipment and save money. Sure, except used tractors are still expensive. A 15-year-old compact tractor still goes for $8,000 to $15,000. And guess what? It's 15 years old. It's going to need maintenance and repairs. Parts aren't cheap. Labor, if you can't fix it yourself, is even worse. And it'll probably break down right when you need it most, during planting or harvest, because that's how old equipment works. Meanwhile, this equipment is a depreciating asset. It's not like land that might hold or gain value. Tractors and implements lose value every year. You're paying thousands of dollars for something that's going to be worth less every season you own it. And most people finance this stuff because they don't have $40,000 sitting around. So now you're paying interest on top of the purchase price for equipment that's actively becoming worth less. You're burning money on an asset that depreciates while you pay interest on it. People do it anyway because they think they need all this stuff to be a real farmer. And you do need it, that's the problem. But needing it doesn't make it affordable. It just means you're stuck spending money you probably don't have on equipment that's going to cost you more money to maintain and operate. And even if you buy all that equipment, you still can't run a farm by yourself. You're going to need help. Here's the reality about labor that nobody wants to talk about. One person cannot run a farm alone. You physically cannot do it. There's planting, weeding, pest management, watering, equipment maintenance, animal care if you have livestock, harvesting, processing, repairs when things break, which they will. It's not a 40-hour-a-week job. It's 60, 70, sometimes 80 hours a week during peak seasons. You cannot do this alone, so you need help. Seasonal labor during planting and harvest runs $15 to $20 an hour, sometimes more, depending on where you are and what the work is. You need at least 2 or 3 people for a couple weeks during harvest. Do the math. 3 people working 40 hours a week for 2 weeks at $18 an hour is $4,320. That's just harvest. You probably need help during planting too. Another $4,000 to $5,000. Now, you're looking at $8,000 to $10,000 a year in seasonal labor costs, minimum. If you're raising livestock, it's even worse, because animals need daily care. You can't just take a week off. Cows need milking, chickens need feeding and egg collection, pigs need feeding and pen maintenance, every single day. That means if you want any kind of life outside the farm, you need year-round help. Hiring one full-time farmhand at even $15 an hour is over $31,000 a year. 2 people? You're at $60,000 to $70,000 annually in labor costs alone. But I'll just do it myself, right? I'll tough it out and save the money. Okay, except you're going to be working 70-hour weeks, doing back-breaking physical labor in all weather. No weekends off, no vacations, ever. Because the animals still need care and the crops don't stop growing just because you're tired. You'll probably hurt yourself at some point because you're exhausted and not paying attention. And most people who try to solo a farm burn out within 2 or 3 years. They just can't sustain it physically or mentally. And people think they'll do this while keeping their day job to cover expenses. That's completely unrealistic unless your farm is purely a hobby and you're barely growing anything. Okay, so you've got land, buildings, equipment, and somehow you're handling the labor. Now, let's talk about what it actually costs to keep things running month after month. Then there's the recurring costs that hit you every single month. This is where small farms bleed money constantly. And it's all stuff you can't avoid. You have to pay these costs or the farm doesn't function. If you have livestock, you need feed. Even a small operation with some chickens, a couple goats, maybe a pig or two, you're spending $200 to $500 a month on feed. Every month. That's $2,400 to $6,000 a year just keeping your animals fed. And that's assuming you're not raising cattle or horses, which cost way more. Veterinary care is another one people don't think about. Routine checkups, vaccinations, deworming. All that basic preventive stuff runs $500 to $1,000 a year for a small livestock operation. But then there's emergency vet care when an animal gets sick or injured. A single emergency farm call can be $300 to $500, and that's before any treatment. One serious illness or injury can easily cost $1,000 to $3,000. You can't just let animals suffer, so you pay it. Farm insurance is mandatory if you're serious. Liability insurance in case someone gets hurt on your property, property insurance for your buildings and equipment, crop insurance if you're growing commercially. You're looking at $1,200 to $3,000 a year minimum for basic coverage, more if you have significant property value or equipment. Fuel costs for running tractors and equipment add up fast. During growing season, you might burn through $100 to $300 a month in diesel or gas. That's another $1,000 to $3,000 annually. Seeds, fertilizer, soil amendments. Even if you're growing organically, you still need inputs. Heirloom seeds, compost, organic fertilizers, pest control materials, all of it costs money. Budget $500 to $2,000 per year depending on what and how much you're growing. Utilities for barns, irrigation pumps, heated waterers in winter, lighting. That's another $50 to $200 a month, so $600 to $2,400 per year. Add it all up, and you're spending $10,000 to $20,000 per year just on recurring operational costs. Every single year. That's assuming nothing major breaks and no animals have serious health problems. Which is optimistic because things break constantly on a farm and animals get sick. It all adds up to this constant drain on your bank account, month after month, and you haven't sold a single thing yet. You're just bleeding money to keep the operation running. So you're spending all this money every month. Surely you can make some of it back selling your produce and livestock, right? Well, here's where people's fantasies about making money farming completely fall apart. The math just doesn't work for small farms. And this is something nobody wants to hear, but everyone needs to understand before they drain their savings. Let's say you want to sell at farmers markets, because that's the dream, right? Direct to consumer. Premium prices. Cut out the middleman. Except farmers market booth fees are $25 to $50 per day. You're giving up an entire Saturday or Sunday, loading up your truck, driving to the market, setting up, standing there all day, then packing up and driving home. That's 8 to 10 hours of your time, plus the booth fee for maybe a few $100s in sales, if you're lucky. What do vegetables actually sell for? Tomatoes go for maybe $3 to $5 per pound. Lettuce, $2 to $4 per bunch. Zucchini, $2 to $3 per pound. These prices sound okay until you calculate your actual yield and costs. Let's say you plant 100 tomato plants. If everything goes perfectly, you might get 20 pounds per plant over the season. That's 2,000 pounds total. At $4 per pound, that's $8,000 in revenue. Sounds great, except you spent $500 on plants and seeds, another $500 on fertilizer and amendments, $300 on pest control, $200 on irrigation water, and probably 200 hours of labor at a minimum. So you made $6,500 in gross profit for 200 hours of work. That's $32.50 an hour if everything went perfectly, which it won't. You'll lose plants to disease. Pests will destroy some. Weather will ruin harvests. Realistically, you're making way less. Livestock is even worse. Raising a pig from weaner to market weight costs $400 to $600 in feed alone over 4 to 6 months. You sell it for maybe $600 to $800 if you can find a buyer willing to pay premium prices for pasture-raised pork. That's $200 to $400 profit per pig, which sounds okay until you factor in your time, vet costs, infrastructure, and the risk the pig gets sick and dies. Most small farms lose money for the first 3 to 5 years. That's just the reality. You're learning, making mistakes, building soil fertility, establishing customer bases. You're not profitable during this time. You're subsidizing your farm with savings or another job. And people think they'll quit their day job and farm full-time and make a living. That's not happening unless you scale way up or get incredibly lucky. Compare your produce prices to what grocery stores charge. Industrial farms have economies of scale you cannot compete with. They grow thousands of acres, have massive equipment, can negotiate better prices on everything. You're never going to match their efficiency or their prices. And we haven't even talked about the regulatory nightmare and lifestyle costs nobody mentions. Then there's the whole thing with regulations and permits that people don't find out about until they're already committed. Starting a farm isn't just buying land and planting stuff. There's a mountain of legal requirements depending on what you're doing and where you are, and nobody tells you about this stuff until you're already invested. You need a business license if you're selling anything. Depending on your state, you might need special permits for selling food products. If you want organic certification, that's a whole separate process that costs $1,000 to $3,000 and requires you to follow specific practices and keep detailed records for years. Water rights permits if you're irrigating from a stream or well in certain areas. Livestock transport permits if you're moving animals. Building permits for any structures you put up. A lot of people buy land and then discover it's zoned in a way that restricts what they can actually do. Maybe you can't have certain animals. Maybe you can't sell directly from the property. Maybe you can't build the barn where you want it. Zoning violations can result in fines or being forced to remove structures you already built. Property taxes are another thing. Some areas give you an agricultural exemption that lowers your property taxes, but you have to prove you're actually farming commercially, not just growing a hobby garden. If you can't prove sufficient agricultural income, you lose the exemption and your taxes go up significantly. If you let anyone onto your property, you need liability insurance, agritourism, farm stands, U-Pick operations, farm tours, all of that opens you up to lawsuits if someone gets hurt. People trip, kids wander off and get injured, someone has an allergic reaction. It happens, and you're liable. Then there's the lifestyle costs nobody talks about. Farming means you can't just decide to take a week off. Animals need care every single day. Plants need attention during critical growth periods. You can't leave during harvest. Your entire life revolves around the farm schedule, not yours. Vacations become impossible without hiring someone to manage things while you're gone, which costs money. The physical toll is real. Farming is brutal on your body. Back injuries, joint problems, repetitive strain injuries, all of it adds up over time. You're lifting heavy things, bending over constantly, working in extreme temperatures. Most farmers have chronic pain by their 40 seconds or 50 seconds. Relationships suffer too. If your partner wasn't fully on board with the farming lifestyle, the reality of 70-hour work weeks and no free time will destroy that relationship eventually. It's isolating work, especially if your farm is rural. So where does all this leave you if you actually want to farm? Look, I'm not saying you shouldn't farm. That's not the point. The dream of farming has real value. Growing your own food, being connected to the land, living a more intentional life, all of that matters. But you need to be realistic about the money part, because that's where most people fail, and it's completely avoidable if you just understand the numbers going in. If you're serious about farming, start small, way smaller than you think you need to. 1 or 2 acres maximum. A few chickens. Some raised beds for vegetables. Test everything before you invest big money. Learn what actually grows well on your land, what you're good at, what you enjoy doing versus what sounds good in theory. Keep your day job for at least 3 to 5 years, maybe longer. Farming is not a quick path to replacing your income. Plan on subsidizing your farm with your regular job while you figure things out. Anyone who tells you to quit your job and farm full-time from day one is setting you up to fail. Budget for $50,000 to $100,000 in startup costs if you're genuinely trying to farm at a scale that could eventually be profitable. If you don't have that kind of money, accept that what you're building is an expensive hobby, not a business. There's nothing wrong with hobby farming, but don't confuse it with making a living. Get your soil tested before you buy land. Buy used equipment and learn to fix it yourself. Start with low-maintenance animals like chickens before you move to goats or pigs. Don't finance anything. If you can't pay cash, you can't afford it yet. Learn for 2 or 3 years before you try to scale up. You can either have a hobby farm that you subsidize with your day job, or you can try to make a real business out of it and probably lose money for years. Most people can't do both. You can look like a farmer on Instagram with your perfect produce photos and rustic lifestyle shots, or you can actually build a sustainable farming operation. But for most people, you can't do both at the same time. Every dollar you spend on looking like a successful farmer is a dollar that's not actually making your farm work. Most people who start farms quit within 5 years because they didn't understand the money part. They thought passion and hard work would be enough. It's not. The economics have to work, or you're just burning through your savings until you give up. But most people won't figure that out until it's too